If you own a Mitsubishi, then check out Rossport. I get almost all of my Stevo parts from Rossport. They provide a large selection of aftermarket and OEM parts, and they're at very competitive prices. The parts get to you as quick as possible, and that's why I've always used Rossport. Check out the link in the description. Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. Now today we're going to be removing this, the old Evo 10 Turbo, capable of about 400 horsepower, and we're going to be replacing it with a GTX3582 Spec Turbo, which should be capable of about 600 horsepower. So yeah, that's the plan for today. Now let's jump into the footage I filmed when removing that factory turbo. Everything they say is true. It's a nightmare to get this turbo out. Everyone has different issues when they're trying to get it out. I've had a few. Nothing that's really stumped me up until actually trying to separate the downpipe. These bolts here are absolutely seized. They are not coming off, and I'm not planning on buying a new downpipe, so I don't really want to go just cutting it. So I was struggling for quite some time. I couldn't separate it from the side of the turbo because there's a bolt that goes from the turbo housing into the downpipe. There's absolutely no access at all. So yeah, that's really slowed me down. But I figured out a way eventually. Decided to separate the exhaust there, and I've managed to then get it through that way. Unfortunately, there was no access down there to undo the sensor, so I can do it now, and there's no connector to easily undo it. So you just got to unwind it now with a spanner, and then the turbo's actually out. So a lot of the things you can't actually take off the turbo even if you want to, such as this pipe here. You just got to figure a way of getting it out, then swap the bits over to your new turbo and put it all back in. But yeah, the hard work is sort of just figuring things out. Now, is this a factory downpipe? What do you think? I think that might be an aftermarket downpipe. Reason for that, there's a spacer on the sensor over there, and also it looks, I'm sure the factory piece has got heat shields. Now I've been noticing quite a few things working through Stevo. Heat shield bolts weren't there. Also, quite concerning really, this oil return here, you can see there, it has to be bolted into the block. It wasn't, it was just sat there. So I'm not sure what work has been done to Stevo in the past, but whoever done the work, they forgot to put the turbo return bolt in. And I cannot believe that I've had the car 2 years and nothing has seriously gone wrong. I have been chasing a mystery oil leak. Maybe that was the problem. The only thing holding that line in was the O-ring. So maybe that was some of the oil leak problems I was having on track. I don't know, but I'm glad I've spotted it. So we'll be searching for a replacement bolt. But yeah, I'll just undo that and then we'll take out the turbo. Okay, so now we've got the old turbo out, we can really compare the two. Apart from being a lot more shiny, they're pretty similar. I mean, in the casting, they're almost identical, but the main difference you'll probably notice looking at it is the size of the wheel on the turbo. The new one doesn't just look bigger, it's actually bigger. Now, I thought the internal wheel would be bigger, but the actual hole on the front, the intake, would be the same size. I've done a little bit of measuring. This intake is actually 5mm bigger than the old one. Now the turbo originally would have this elbow on it, and we're going to have to move it over now onto the new turbo. Now it's a good idea to actually widen the whole intake system so that it's not restricting the turbo. But my AEM intake kit is actually wider than factory, and it's actually about the same sort of diameter as this turbo port. Now the only bottleneck really is this turbo elbow. Now I don't really want to go replacing the turbo elbow So what I'm going to do is actually port it. I'm going to port mainly the edge just to sort of smooth out the flow of air. If I put it against the turbo, you might be able to see that there's like a 4mm, well, a 2mm either side step. So that's going to actually restrict the flow to the turbo. So what we're going to do is, just with a Dremel, the outside imprint that you can see, we're going to just match it really with a Dremel and smooth that out so it's a nice curve and it's not going to like cause too much turbulence or anything like that in there. Will it make much of a difference? I'm not sure, but the turbo is going to be sucking in loads of air, so anything I can do to increase the flow is a good thing. So we're going to do that now. I'll probably do it off camera. It's very simple. You just got to use a Dremel and smooth out the edges. So I'll show it to you when it's done. So as I showed earlier, the opening on the bigger turbo is wider. You don't have to do this. I just chose to port it so that the flow is a little smoother. So there's no big step now to the turbo. It sort of gradually expands. It might help reduce drag. So we're now going to stick on the turbo elbow. I've also gone around the turbo. The cold side housing is painted with some sort of protective paint, and I've just lightly scraped off the paint on all the mating surfaces for the oil feed, return, etc. So they're all nice and clean now on bare metal. So when I put either the copper washers on or the sealant, it's going to seal. So I'm going to use a little bit of sealant on this surface to seal it against the turbo. We don't want a vacuum leak, and also from factory it had sealant either side of this gasket. Now this gasket is a restriction. If I put it over this, you can see the sort of porting I've done, because I put it over there and you can see clearly there's a restriction. Now I take it off, it's obviously got the wider hole now. So we're going to put a bit of sealant on there. We're not going to use the gasket because it doesn't do a lot. They were relying on sealant anyway. Now the sealant I'm using is Loctite SI5699. Apparently it's really good, and it's pretty much the stuff that Mitsubishi would have used, so definitely quality stuff. Yeah, let's do it. You really do not need a lot on this. Now when I took the old one off, there was all globs of sealant right in front of the turbo impeller. So that's super thin, that layer there. You don't want any excess, because if it squelches out, it's going to squelch and basically block the flow of air. Perfect. Now if you see it squelching too much, then obviously that's a problem, because it's going to be squelching on the inside as well, where the flow is critical, but it's not, it's hardly anything. So quite happy with that. We didn't put too much on by the looks of it, and looking inside, it hasn't squelched. So a good seal, two clean surfaces, there's going to be no leaks there. I'm going to put the oil return line back on. I've got a gasket here, so this has given me jip in the past, not on this car but on a turbo build I've done. They're known to be hard to seal, and on the Subaru engine rebuild I did, this was a nightmare. So I've taken every step I can to install it properly and minimise the risk of it leaking. Now apparently you're not supposed to use any sealant on it. That's what the instructions say. I really want to, but you know, it says not to, so I suppose it would make sense to listen to the instructions. Let's stick it on. Okay, so it's time now to put the turbo back in. Obviously we're going to have to remember that the O2 sensor wasn't connected, so we'll have to do that with it sort of partially balanced in. Put the O2 sensor back in and then feed the pipe through. The reason we're doing it that way was simply because the elbow to downpipe bolts are taking quite a lot of force. I don't really want to snap them, so it's a little workaround. So the turbo's almost in place. Got a little jumper covering the cylinder deck. So yeah, we got the O2 sensor in. Now all I have to do is pick this up, wiggle it into position, and then start reattaching everything. So there we have the turbo. It's looking nice and shiny, and I cannot wait to see what this turbo is capable of. So the turbo is in. It wasn't actually too difficult. Everything's been torqued up. Took my time as well because I really don't want any issues moving forward because the access is quite difficult. So it's good to be very careful with all the torque settings, new gaskets, everything, because any leaks, it's going to be difficult to do it at a later point. Now I can actually refit the cylinder head on Stevo, but before I do that, I want to upgrade the valve train. That's going to allow the engine to rev higher. So we're going to be fitting Supertech dual valve springs and titanium retainers supplied by Rossport, since they are the Supertech dealer for the UK. Also Jun camshafts, so they're going to increase the top end power and they're going to complement the power band of that bigger turbo that we've just fit. So we'll be fitting those Jun camshafts as well. And because we're changing the camshafts, we're going to have to actually re-shim the valve clearances. So I'll probably be doing that off the car. But once all that's done, then we can actually stick the cylinder head back on. So yeah, the next video to look forward to on Stevo, titanium retainers and dual valve spring upgrade on the cylinder head. So if you want to be sure not to miss that video, click subscribe down below, and also if you've enjoyed this video, do give it a like because it does help the channel to get recommended. So thank you for all your support, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers guys.